Well, let's look at those godly women that have mastered the art. So back up to verse 3, and let's begin a step-by-step look at all 12 characteristics of the Titus 2 woman. Paul lists them in these verses we've already read, but we'll look at them one by one. Older women that have mastered all 12 of these areas are to train younger women in the last 7. The first one is, it says in verse 3, the older women likewise, that they be reverent in their behavior. Reverent. That's the first one. Paul first draws a word from the Roman world. In fact, this word he uses is an unusual word, and it comes right out of the culture that they lived in. And I was telling Bonnie, I said it just rang like a bell, because it was something everyone knew, everyone saw their whole life growing up in the Greco-Roman world. And Paul says, I want you to be reverent. Now, to us, reverent, I don't know what you think of with reverent. You might think of a dark suit and white shirt, or whatever. Or, Puritan, quiet, not talking. But that's not the idea. It captured the entire bearing of the godly role model women in Christ's church. Paul used a word that meant to operate as a priest in a temple. It's actually the pagan background of this word. In the ancient world, temples and gods were always outside of town. I never knew that till our last trip. I never thought about that. We were standing outside of Ephesus, came out of the great theater, and then when we came out of the great theater in Ephesus, there was this gigantic, I'd never seen it before, this gigantic road, marble road, going off into a bank of trees. And I asked the guide, I said, what's that? He says, that's the sacred way. I said, what's the sacred way? He says, 1 mile from here, that way is the great temple of Diana of the Ephesians. And I looked back, I said, it's outside of town. He said, every temple's outside of town. The Greeks and the Romans never put their temples in town. They always put them way outside of town. And they had this big road you had to go on. Before you could start on the road, you had to take a little bath, and you had to put on a sacred garment, and you walked down the road to the temple. And when you got to the temple, you were greeted by similarly clad priests and priestesses that were representatives of the gods. And they acted like representatives of the gods. That's the word Paul uses. Because the Greek word translated reverent, only used here in the Bible, conveys the idea of being priest-like. Now, isn't it interesting? The very first description of what a godly older woman in the faith is to be reverent, priest-like in her behavior. Wow. That is a message in itself. It's a word for acting as a representative of a god. And that's the word Paul uses to describe the devout and godly character of a Titus 2 woman. Older women are to live like holy priests, serving in the presence of God as they live life. Their sacred personal devotion to the Lord slowly comes to influence every part of their life. Notice what it says, that they be reverent in behavior. In other words, this is just spread through their whole life. This priest-like behavior. It just permeates all of their life. This is the Greek word semnos. It means august, venerable, honorable, or in context of a local church, a woman who lives in such a godly way, she can be emulated and venerated for her character. Her life is an example to the women of the flock of all ages. In fact, this same basic word is used all through the New Testament. And in 1 Timothy 3:11, it says, likewise, their women must be reverent. Paul, right in the middle of discussing what elders and deacons look like, right in the middle of that, he says, likewise, their, gunaikos must be semnos. Their women must be reverent. This priest-like representative of God as a behavior of life. It's amazing how often this is used. It says in New King James says reverent. New American says dignified. New International says worthy of respect. This is talking about a lifestyle that is beautifully desired to be emulated. It's someone who is revered, someone who is venerated in a godly sense. That you say, I want to follow the Lord like they do. Doesn't that sound like 1 Corinthians 11:1? Be you followers of Christ, Paul said, like I am. See, he was a model. And he said, I want a church filled with women models of Christ. No higher aspiration, no higher usefulness than that. Paul calls all of us who will be useful in Christ's church to the same high calling. The same word in basic form is used for deacons, 1 Timothy 3:8. The same word is used for older men, Titus 2:2. In fact, Paul extends this priest-like attitude to the life and goal of every believer. It says in 1 Timothy 2:2, we must all lead a tranquil and quiet life in godliness and this word semnas, dignity, this priest-like behavior, always behaving like we're a priest of the King of the universe. This word also shows up in the guide for what we're to think about in Philippians 4:8. Do you remember, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are, and there it is. Noble is the way it's translated there, but it means this reverent behavior. Think about what leads to reverent priest-like behavior. Meditate on these things. Paul was reminding the early church believers that what they thought about and allowed to stay on their minds is what they would become. So the consecrated, godly woman of Titus 2 would be heeding what the Old Testament repeatedly says. Remember Proverbs 23:7? For as man thinketh in his heart, so is he. As a person, what we think about and meditate, we become. That's what this is. For a person to think about noble things, about reverent, godly things, directs their whole life toward becoming that.